Welcome to Bringing IP to Life. I'm Anna from Amanya IP and Amanya Design, and I'm joined by my guests to talk about IP. We're going to hear people's stories of their creativity, business, and entrepreneurship. Intellectual property can be a really dull subject until it becomes personal. This is aimed to help see the relevance of IP in everyday life. Welcome to the show. So welcome to the IP to Life show. I am joined by Owen Gledall, who runs a business called Merlin, and he serves the leisure industry. So we're going to hear about his journey in building a business and in his IP journey as well. And if you want to stay for part 2 of the show, we're going to hear a little bit about what goes on behind the scenes. We're going to hear a little bit of a snippet of the show. So listen in, we're going to hear a little bit about what we're talking about today.
Names should be generic. So you should never be tied to a name. So I said, okay, what's your business called then? So he said, well, my business is called Sage. I said, all right, okay. I said, well, what does that mean? He says, exactly. It can be anything I want it to be.
So Owen is in a busy working business. So if you hear people in the background, it's because he's at work. So this is what we're listening to. But welcome, Owen. Lovely to have you on the show.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Yes. So Owen, let's just hear a little bit about, tell us succinctly what you do and how you serve the leisure industry.
Well, predominantly we provide access control, ticketing, memberships, services for visitor attractions, venues and events. Effectively, in simple terms, you provide the experience, we manage the people.
And so you do this for all over the UK, don't you?
We do it all over the UK. We've also got clients in Africa and the Middle East.
So you're not limited by geography?
Not at all, no. We're only limited predominantly by language, actually. We tend to serve English-speaking countries and/or territories.
We're going to hear a little snippet of Owen talking to somebody at a trade show, and where he's explaining about the business and talking about his main competitor and how they can do things differently.
Owen, you told me your business is about people.
Yeah, we manage people wherever they need to go, whether it's a venue, an event, a festival, visitor attraction, a restaurant, a sports stadium, anywhere where people need managing, ticketing and booking.
And how do you manage them then?
The software manages them. So we have a platform which is available to be used by anybody who wants to organise an event, take bookings and issue tickets. There's a leading player in our market, and that's an organisation called Eventbrite. And they're well known, and they're a huge American multi-billion-dollar corporation. And we compete directly with them. I think the surprising thing is that we can compete directly with them and, in fact, offer something better, both in terms of functionality and in value.
So if someone is considering that, if someone's considering using Eventbrite or using yourself, what is the extra value?
Predominantly, there are probably 4 key things. The first thing is if you put an event on Eventbrite, it's not your event, it belongs to Eventbrite and it sits on their website. The second thing is that any data that you collect for that event doesn't belong to you, it belongs to Eventbrite, and under GDPR you can't use it. The third thing is that if you put it on Eventbrite's website, it uses all their branding. With our system, it's all your branding, all your corporate identity, and it sits on your website. And fourthly, if you use Eventbrite, it's 15%. If you use Merlin, it's 3%.
So, Owen, we met a few years ago now at a networking event, And you've been one of my business mentors along the way, challenged me with quite a few things in my business journey. And you shared with me about some issues you'd had with securing your trademark. So we're going to hear a little bit about that in a little bit. But first of all, I'd like to hear a little bit about the business journey. What took you to building Merlin right in the first place?
Oh, well, I came from a family business. So my family had been in business over generations, predominantly in the transport business. So my father, he had cars and coaches, and his brother had lorries and coal deliveries and all that sort of stuff. So I was brought up in that industry. So I knew all about how you had to work hard to make things happen, and how it relied on you to do it and not on others, and all that sort of stuff, which people now call entrepreneurism. But I'm
Right.
not quite sure that my French was good enough in those days to even pronounce it, let alone understand what it was. But
Yes.
I left school at 16 and joined the RAF
Right.
as a boy entrant, and then realised that I should have stayed at school and got some qualifications. So I then had to work a lot harder whilst holding down effectively a job and training to be an electronics technician and passing my exams all at the same time.
Wow.
But I also found a real business opportunity, because we were treated very poorly, I guess, as young 16-year-olds,
Right.
and everything we had was very, very minimal. So we had a very minimal allowance, and we were paid fortnightly with a very minimal allowance during the course of the term. And that was fine for those of us who could live on a fairly limited income.
Right.
But for those people that smoked, it was quite a difficult thing, because there wasn't enough money in the kitty to pay
Right.
for everything else and buy cigarettes that would last 2 weeks.
Okay.
So
Okay.
I came across the opportunity to supply cigarettes to those that needed them because of their addiction.
Oh, I see. Gosh, really, Owen?
I went out and invested in a packet of 200 Park Drive cigarettes, and
Oh my
I
goodness.
used to then. I started off by loaning them out, so you got one from me for two back, and that was all right at first, but then people didn't have any to give me back, and if they gave me two back, they were already two down, and so I then started to sell them instead of doing that, and that didn't work out too well, because they didn't have the money to
Right.
pay me. So what I started to do, I created accounts for all the smokers, and they used to get cigarettes on tick, and I used to keep a record of all their owings, and then at the end of each semester, we used to get paid the money that they'd kept back from us during the course of that particular term, in
Wow.
order that we'd have something to come home on leave with and be able to spend when we got home. And I used to collect my monies at the end of each semester. So we would march in and give our number, rank, and name, and get our money. And then I had a table at the back, and I had my little book, and I would get paid as you walked out. And
Look.
at the end of my 2 years in college with the RAF, I walked into Thompson's and Doncaster and bought a car for cash.
Wow. Wow. So this is the hidden past that most people don't know about.
That's right. That's how I started.
Oh, I didn't know that about you, Owen.
So
Wow.
that was my first business, selling cigarettes illegally, with I have to say the acquiescence of the RAF, because not only did they allow me to do it, but they also allowed me to have a little table at the back to make sure I got paid.
Gosh, how funny. How funny. So tell us what happened in between, because obviously you started there with your dodgy business.
Yes, well, I continued in the RAF for a number of years. I was posted out to the Far East, and I served in the Malay campaign with
Right.
the RAF. I served with I was seconded to the 1st Royal New Zealand Infantry Regiment, the Kiwis, for a while, And then I was seconded to the Gurkhas, and I spent some time with the 45th Gurkha Rifles, doing various bits and pieces. But I also realized that people a long way away from home and wives, girlfriends, and family needed to be in contact with them. So I went out and bought some camera equipment and some studio equipment and started doing photographs for people to send home. So I had a little business running there with my little photographic studio.
So entrepreneurship is in your blood. Wow. Wow.
So that kept me going there. So then when I came back from there, I was able to buy another car for cash. This time it was a brand new one. The first one wasn't brand new, but this time it was a brand new one.
Okay. So what happened next, and at what stage did you get into doing your own business?
Well, I left the RAF and went back into the family business because my father wanted me to get involved with the family business. So I went into the family business for a while. It wasn't really what I wanted to do, and Dad and I weren't really good business fellows.
Right.
His idea of business was far too old-fashioned and safe for me.
Right.
I wanted to be doing things and making things happen, and he wanted everything to be exactly as it should be, and everything, all the I's dotted and the T's crossed, and that wasn't my way of doing things. So I left and went back working for the RAF for a while, actually.
Right.
As a civilian, helping them develop some of their new electronic air traffic control systems.
Okay.
And then from there, actually, I moved from there into printing.
Okay.
Developing electronic printing systems, converting the old hot metal stuff that used to be used for producing publications, newspapers, magazines, etc., to be able to use phototypesetting. So I was instrumental in developing the first phototypesetting systems. And then from there, I moved into retailing, using laser scanning for barcode reading at the point of sale, and developed the very first systems for that in the UK for people like Sainsbury's and Hillard's before they became Tesco and Morrison's and people like that. And it was from there that I then went off on my own, because I realized that whilst all the big boys had access to this technology, because they had the infrastructure, they had the wherewithal and everything else to manage it, the smaller independent retailers didn't have access to this technology because they couldn't afford it.
Right.
And just at around that time, IBM brought out its own computer called the IBM PC, which was a big box with a monitor and a keyboard and some software that you could use to put programs on, very early programs, but you could also put your own programs on it. So I developed software for independent retail and tried to use the IBM PC as a platform for that. It wasn't really up to it. It wasn't powerful enough. So for a couple of years, I was doing some consultancy work while I was still developing the software. And then when IBM brought out its big brother to the PC, which had more power, more memory, more capability, I was then able to put my software on that and then start selling retail systems out to the small, independent, multi-branch retailers, which was my market.
Wow. So is that the beginning of Merlin? Is that how that started?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it wasn't called Merlin in its early days. Merlin came about as a result of changes in the business. When we first started, the business was called Retail Manager, because that's what we did. We managed retail for people. However, what happened from there was that I got involved with an organization called the Business Accounting Software Developers Association. And the problem that we had as software developers was that, and this links very much into your IP scenario, is that we had no protection.
Right.
There was obviously the publications and Copyright Act and things like that, but software wasn't included.
Right.
And so and at the time, software was becoming quite popular because it was a new thing. And so people were copying software left, right, and centre, and we had no protection. We weren't covered by the Copyright Designs and Patents Act at all. That was predominantly for printed material and not for software. So we formed the Business Accounting and Software Developers Association to allow us to have IP protection for our product.
Right.
And I was one of the founder members of that. And we formed it actually one day down in the Directors Club down in Pall Mall in London. And we'd done all the basic heads of terms and basic structure of the organisation, and then we went for lunch, and I was sat next door to a guy who'd been in the meeting with me earlier, and we got chatting, and he said, and what's your business called? So I said, Retail Manager. So he said, you do retail systems then? So I said, yeah, that's what we do. He said, you don't do wholesale systems then? I said, well, yeah, of course we do. I said, wholesale is just retailing without the VAT.
Right.
I said, VAT's an add-on in wholesaling where it's integrated in retailing. I said, everything else is pretty much the same. So he said, well, why isn't it called Wholesale Manager then?
Okay.
So I said, well, because our biggest client base is retail. So he said, well, yeah, he said, you'll regret that. So I said, okay. He said, names should be generic. So you should never be tied to a name. So I said, okay, what's your business called then? So he said, well, my business is called Sage. I said, all right, okay. I said, well, what does that mean? He says, exactly. It can be anything I want it to be.
Right.
And at the time, it was the Sage accounting system very much in its infancy, and that was David Goldman, the original founder of Sage.
Interesting.
So he said, you give some thought to that. So a few years later, when Windows became the prevalent operating system, and we all had to make changes to operate on Windows, we decided that the business perhaps with a new version needed a new name.
Okay.
Or the product at least needed a new name. So we looked around for a name for the product, and we had various names plastered on the walls in the office, and people were giving their opinions on them. And at the same time, we were clearing out an old filing cabinet of some stuff that we'd had in for a number of years. And we'd done some work for an organisation in London who supplied retail terminals.
Right.
And we'd written some software for them. And their terminal was called the Merlin Terminal.
Okay.
And these brochures were in the filing cabinet. And one of the people in the office says, well, why don't we call it Merlin? We've already used Merlin once some years ago. Why don't we go back to that?
Okay.
So we decided we would use the name Merlin. Everybody in the office seemed to think that was a great idea because it can be an it can be a he, it can be anything you want it to be. So,
yes.
And going back to David Goldman's comments all those years earlier, it struck a chord with me that there was a name not dissimilar to Sage that could be anything you wanted it to be. So that's how Merlin came about. So then we changed our name to Merlin, or at least we changed the software to Merlin. We didn't change the company name at that time, but we changed the software to be called Merlin. We changed the company name sometime later, but our software was Merlin. And then of course we then had a battle to be able to in a position to protect that with by trademark, and that proved to be a little more difficult, but we got there in the end.
We're going to come back to that in a minute, Owen. So you talked, Owen, about the you not being able to cover your the protection with the software. Now, I understand that the Copyrights Act does cover software, but there were changes. There were different. It was different when you started. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's been updated several times in the last sort of 20 years, 30 years. Bearing in mind, we've been in business now 40 years.
Right. the law has had to catch up with what's been going on in industry.
Oh yeah, well, law does that, doesn't it?
Yeah. So let's go back to this story behind your trademark, because that has been a bit of an interesting story. So tell us what happened when you decided to call your software Merlin, but then decided to go down the trademark route. Talk to us about that.
Well, Merlin was actually, the name Merlin was owned by British Telecom, and they developed a telephone system back in the early 60s called the Merlin telephone system.
Right.
So when we started using the name Merlin for a technical product, they got a little bit jumpy about it and wanted to know more about what we were doing. And I actually had a meeting with their patent people down in Euston Road in London.
Right.
And we sat down and discussed, and they wanted Merlin for telecommunications. That was what class they wanted Merlin in.
Right.
So we came up with a set of words that would meet ours and theirs requirements, so that we had the rights to Merlin software for use in retail and wholesale applications. And they kept the name Merlin for use in telecommunications and associated industries. So we managed to agree with them that we would use those that wording in our trademark application, and on that basis, they allowed us to make an application to the body to get a trademark for Merlin. And it was interesting, actually, because we were challenged by the National Lottery because they said, well, it contravenes our trademark for Merlin, the gaming machine.
Right.
So we were quite miffed by that, because they were already under sub-license from British Telecom, as effectively we were. So I went back to British Telecom and said, well, how come the National Lottery are complaining when, you guys who own it have not complained at all? And they said, oh, well, okay, well, leave that with us and we'll get that sorted. So they put their patent lawyers on to the National Lottery people. And eventually they withdrew their objection. It took a couple of years or so for that to happen, but going backwards and forwards, and incurring costs here, there, and everywhere, as patent lawyers do. But eventually they backed off, and we got it approved.
Wow. So
we've had battles with it ever since, because people keep trying to use Merlin for other things, not least of which was Merlin Entertainments Group, who effectively work in the same industry as we do.
Right. Yes.
And we had to battle them in the early days.
Oh, interesting. Interesting. So, Owen, did you go for any other forms of, you were talking about patents. Have you got patents in your business as well?
No, we don't have any patents, because, we've developed some interesting hardware solutions over the years, which were quite unique in their own right. But having said that, we've never looked to get patents on them for two main reasons. One, because of the significant cost of a patent.
Yes.
And secondly, to really get yourself protection, you've got to have your patent in virtually every country in the world. Otherwise, it's not secure.
Right.
Because if you haven't got it in Bangladesh, but you have got it in somewhere else, and they decide to copy it in Bangladesh, there's absolutely nothing you can do. So patents they're okay if you've genuinely got something that's absolutely totally unique. Well, we didn't. It was the first of its kind, but it wasn't totally unique.
Right.
For example, we designed and built the very first touchscreen for retail.
Wow.
But it wasn't unique because the component parts of it we bought in. Okay.
So you've relied on trademarking as your form of IP to build the business?
We have,
Yeah. So in that journey of having all those bumps and conflicts, I suppose with a name like Merlin, which is a very usable, recognizable name, I suppose that kind of thing will continue to happen, won't it? You getting challenges about.
Oh yeah, I got a letter only a few weeks ago from the intellectual property office about somebody that's
right.
trying to use it.
Yes. And what do you do when that happens? Do you ever
Challenge it?
You do challenge it.
Always.
Yeah. If they're in a different area, or does it vary?
It depends what they're doing with it. If they're if anything associated with what we're doing,
yes,
then we challenge it. If they want to have Merlin dog food, then we wouldn't challenge that.
Right. Yes. Yeah.
It's totally irrelevant to us. So yeah. So if it's relevant, but invariably, if it's not relevant, you don't get a letter.
No.
The office will only send you a letter if they think there's a potential issue. Because obviously there's costs involved. As soon as you get involved in this, it's the initial fee is £100, then it's £500, and you're into £600 before you've even kicked off.
Yes, yeah, because I've had some correspondence with them about asking them if they want to challenge other names, but they've all been slightly different to mine and in different fields. But so, what's been the process when you have challenged them? How's that worked?
Oh, we've always won.
Yeah, but what's been the process? You've been corresponding with the intellectual property office. Is that how you've done it?
Well, invariably, I use a patent lawyer and put them on and let them sort it out. I don't get involved myself.
Right. Yes.
There are too many nuances associated with it that if you're not careful, you can miss something quite easily. So I tend to leave it to the experts.
Yeah.
and then when we win, I just claim all my costs back.
Oh, very good. Very good. Have you won them all? All the ones you've challenged?
Yes.
How many challenges have you had?
Oh, I don't know. Three really big ones, I think, where one of them actually said to me, "Well, you've got no chance. We've got deeper pockets than yours." And I said to the guy, "Yeah, but the law's on our side."
Yeah. Yes.
And deep pockets didn't get him there. The law did.
That's good. And
I thought it was quite. We had one that it went, and then we're literally coming up the steps to the court when they agreed to capitulate.
Wow. Yeah. Well, it's an expensive road, isn't it? If you want to.
Oh, it's very, very. One of them. It cost us, I think, about £14,000.
Wow.
And then and that's the one that capitulated. So because we didn't go to court, we couldn't claim costs back.
Oh, right. Okay.
They knew what they were doing. They were just running a bill up for us.
Wow.
If you'd like to know more about intellectual property or IP, check out the Amanya IP website at www.amanyaipcourses.com. Courses vary from general basic understanding about IP for adults, young people and students, through to professional courses and courses for the USA market. The courses are aimed to help young people, students, designers, artists, business owners and entrepreneurs become IP smart to enable them to protect their dreams.
So, Owen, you've got so many gems to share with us today. We're going to split this part of the show into two parts because there's too much here for one show. So come back and listen to the other parts of the story where Owen talks about the business development and how he's made it all work.
Thanks for joining us on the show. Like, follow and subscribe to make sure you hear about what's coming up next. You can head over to the website www.amanyaipcourses.com to find out more. See you again soon.